It's the Go Gopher Podcast with Mike Grimm, episode number 169. I am Mike Grimm, voice of the Golden Gophers, and welcome back to the podcast. We have a truly special guest this week on the Go Gopher Podcast, legendary Minnesota sportscaster Joe Schmit of Channel 5 and Channel 45, retired earlier this week after 40-plus years at the St. Paul-based television stations. He's covered it all, including many of the Gophers' best moments over the years. We'll chat with him about his retirement, about his career highlights, about what's next for him, and much more. No doubt you'll enjoy the highly talented and highly esteemed Joe Schmit on the show this week. Our Go Gopher Podcast is presented by alumni-owned Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're a business founder planning to exit your business, start by contacting Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. Sunbelt serves more businesses up to $5 million in revenue than anyone, and True North M&A serves companies with revenues up to $150 million. Get a confidential, no-cost, no-obligation business valuation started today. Make the most of your life's work. Visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union's also a big sponsor of the Go Gopher Podcast. Life math is complicated, and Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union makes it easier with local financial experts available to help in person or virtually. Go to affinityplus.org/Go Gophers for more info. The Go Gopher Podcast is also presented by onX Maps. Find out how to download the onX Fish app for free by listening to the Go Gopher Podcast. We're podcasting episode 169 from the Aquarius Home Services studio. We invite you to subscribe to the Go Gopher Podcast. It's free to subscribe and free to listen at any time. You can go back and listen to previous Go Gopher podcasts. Last episode, for example, we talked Golden Gopher basketball with Ryan James from Gopher Illustrated. Still some good things on that, which remain timely, so go back and have a listen to Ryan. This week, we're talking with Joe Schmit. He'll join me next.
I'm Clay Geary, walk-on turned scholarship wide receiver for Gopher football.
And I'm Ben Utek, U of M alumni, Super Bowl champion, and Tony Dungy Uncommon Award winner.
We understand championship culture, which is why we're part of the True North family of companies.
True North invests in only elite teams, like the champion team at Sunbelt Business Advisors, Minnesota's largest seller of companies. To learn more about True North and our diverse family of independently owned companies, visit TrueNorthEquityPartners.com.
Keep the good times rolling without the regrets. Giggly THC beverages are your go-to for bold flavor and smooth vibes. Zero alcohol, no bad decisions. Just THC-infused cocktails, seltzers, and teas packed with natural ingredients and performance-boosting superfoods like ashwagandha and ginseng. Find Giggly at over 500 locations like Total Wine, MGM, and Cub Foods, or shop online at giggly.com. That's GIGLI.com. Ready to upgrade your drink game? Use the code Giggly North, as in Giggly Talk North. Giggly North, GIGLI North, for 50% off your first order. Giggly, sip smarter, feel better.
It's episode number 169, the Go Gopher Podcast, and it's our extreme pleasure to welcome to the podcast this week Mr. Joe Schmit. I would normally say from KSTP, Channel 5 and Channel 45, but this week things changed a little bit for you, Joe. First of all, thanks for coming on. It is really an honor to have you on, and your days on TV, you have decided to retire. Tell us about the decision, why now, and how now that it is behind you, so to speak. I think Wednesday was your final night on TV. How has it been so far?
Well, it's been a little bit different. It's kind of funny. I read the sports section this morning, and all of a sudden I realized I was reading it a little bit different, because I would always read it like thinking about, okay, what's coming up this week? What's coming up next week? How are we thinking? And all of a sudden I was reading it. I was like going, I don't have to care whether the Twins are going to be home or on a road game. I don't have to care what time the Wolves game starts, the Wolves playoff game starts, because I'll watch it on TV.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a little bit different. The question as to why now, it just felt like it was time. And it wasn't time because I didn't like the job anymore, or was bored or anything. It was just time because I have a lot of things going on the outside, and I thought, you only have so much time, and I want to be able to do a lot of things yet, before all of a sudden it becomes my time. So it was time. It really, and I just I'm 67 years old now. So it's like, do I want to do this like Sid? And I thought, no, I don't think I want to do it like Sid. And although he was amazing.
Yeah.
And it just felt like the right time.
Yeah. And I think people, too, sometimes we see you on TV and we think, oh, it's a 10:25 sportscast. Joe got there around 10 o'clock. He was able to spend time. There is a lot to it. You're not home often at night. There becomes a strain on that. And when you do it for 40 years, right, at some point, I suppose there just becomes a time where you'd like to sit at home at night and turn on a game or a movie or go out to eat and not have to worry about being at the station in a few hours.
And that's certainly part of it. It's just, I could not control my schedule. And believe me, I'm not complaining because I had a fantastic ride. But, after 40 years of working nights and weekends and holidays, I started taking notes. And at the Masters, okay, I think the Masters might be my favorite sport event to watch on TV on Sunday, right? Yeah. The Masters. We have a 5:30 newscast. I had to run out and do the 5:30 newscast, and I missed Rory's purge. So I'm like going, next year, I'm going to be watching the Masters on my big screen TV on my favorite chair.
Yeah.
And not have to run off and do a newscast. So I started taking some notes on things like that. And, but, I just, I wanted to do it before I wanted to leave on my own terms before, all of a sudden, sometimes you don't get that option in this business.
Yeah. And in terms of what happens now, you mentioned that you have other things going on. I think a lot of people know you as the guy that they see on TV, the guy they watch on the state tournaments and all this stuff, but you have a lot of other stuff going. People that really follow it know that you have other things going, but I think the casual person might not know that you have a pretty robust speaking schedule, that you go out and do motivational speeches. You've written several books. Take us through that part of Joe Schmit's life and how that now with retirement will be able to maybe take a more stronger forefront in what you're doing.
Well, it's become my passion and my mission. I've written a couple of books, 3 books, but I've written 2 books on people who make an impact on the world. And I've developed that into a speech, and it kind of just happened through osmosis. How it is, Mike. And when you're in the media, you get asked to MC certain events or speak at certain events. And I eventually started telling some stories about people who made an impact. And the next thing I knew, people say, will you come and speak here at 3 a.m.? Will you come speak here? And I always had an entrepreneurial side to me, started a speaking business, and now I speak about 50 times a year. I'm speaking all over the country. The day after my last day at KSTP, I had 2 speeches that day, so it didn't feel like I retired the day after I retired. So, and I like it, and it's very rewarding. And then, the one book I wrote, the Right Thing to Do, this Joe Mauer book that 100% goes to charity, which is really a cool thing with, Minnesota legend Joe Mauer. It's becoming a musical at Stages Theater in Hopkins, and I'm going to be involved in that too. So just some kind of fun stuff, but just controlling your schedule.
Yeah. You mentioned the book, The Right Thing to Do, with Joe Mauer. It's got such a cool story. You mentioned impact. Give us, if you will, just a little bit of maybe part of the impact speech that you make in relation to what Joe Mauer did and why it sent you to having the idea to approach Joe about writing this book.
Well, Mike, when Joe Mauer signed with the Twins, was the number 1 draft choice, I had heard a story about Joe walking a young student who was blind to the lunchroom every day. And I stewed on that story probably for 20 years. And one time I just decided, I got to find out more about that story. So I talked to Joe about it. I found Mike Halley, the young man who Joe walked to the lunchroom every day. Then I found 6 guys who sat around that table, and the impact that it had on these guys and is still having today. I said, that is a book. That's a story. I use it in my keynote speeches, became popular in my keynote speeches. It's in one of my books. And then my publisher came and said, you ought to write a children's book. Well, it's been very successful. We've all the money goes to charity. We've raised $125,000 to charity so far. It's been donated to 850 schools, and I get emails and notes from teachers all over the state and the upper Midwest, saying that this has been such a hit with the kids. So it's been very rewarding that way.
Joe Mauer, we know as such a good, down-to-earth guy for being the superstar that he was. Take me through how it started. It was just kind of innocent, right, in terms of him. He just approached this young kid named Mike and one day said, let's go to lunch. I'll sit with you. And then that turned into every day of his senior year.
Yeah, Mike was new to the school, and he normally ate in the lunchroom alone. And it's funny, Mike, when I tell this story, afterwards, people will come up to me and they'll say, I was Mike in that lunchroom, or we can all remember where we sat, what the lunchroom smelled like, what the food was. Everybody has a memory of their high school lunchroom. And Joe just saw Mike eating alone one day and thought, well, that's not right. So he invited him to sit down at the table. Well, then they found out Mike was a huge sports fan. As a matter of fact, they were sitting with all these athletes, but Mike knew more about sports than all the athletes. If they wanted to know how many points did Kevin Garnett score the night before, they would ask Mike. They wanted to know what happened at the Gopher hockey game, who scored the goals. Mike would know. He was a walking encyclopedia of sports. And to this day, he still is. He can rattle off stats. It's fun.
Well, and as you know, as life moves on, demands and different things happen. So Joe Mauer and this young Mike had not seen each other or been around each other for a while, and you were able to kind of have a reunion with those guys. Take me through what that was like.
Well, and it was interesting because, one of the impacts that this story had is a young lady by the name of Katie Shatesky read the story in my book, Silent Impact. She was so inspired that she decided to start a charity run for mental health. It now became a charity called Thumbs Up for Mental Health. And I've been trying to help her with the charity and get it going. And she called me one day and she said, why don't you get Joe and Mike together again? And I said, I've been thinking about it a long time. Joe had retired. And I thought about doing it while he was playing baseball, but he was so busy playing baseball and the demands of pro athletes, and especially a guy like Joe Mauer, that I called up Joe, and Joe said, oh, that'd be great. That'd be fun. And they had been in a little bit of contact over the years, but they hadn't been face-to-face for a long time. And we went to the same lunchroom, went to the same table, and sat Mike down and brought Joe in. And it was just a great moment.
Yeah.
And now those two have reconnected. They're obviously involved in the play a little bit. We're trying to get funding to do a documentary on all the things that have happened off of this. We had a world-class documentary team all lined up for it. So we're just working on finding the right partner to get this out there because we have national interest in this story. So who knows if that'll happen or not, but the goodness continues to happen. One little kind act, 23, 24 years ago is still having a ripple effect today.
Well, I mean, and this is a much different thing, but even as an adult, sometimes you go through that where you're the new guy. I can distinctly remember, just to, not to make this about me or anything, but a similar, when I first got my job in St. Louis, I worked at KMOX for just over 5 years. And, media guys hang around with guys they've known and have worked with. So the first 3 or 4 days at Cardinals games, they have, the press meal at Busch Stadium. This was the old Busch Stadium, the middle Busch Stadium. And so I just kind of sit there by myself. You know who ended up after like night 3 coming and sitting with me for then the next month or so to say, hey, it's okay to sit with the new guy? Jack Buck.
Oh, my God.
So Jack Buck, I mean, it tells you about what people think and what kind of people they are, right? And so Jack Buck on like my 3rd night comes over and he says, is there a seat open? I'm like, yeah, seat's open. And so he sits down. And, I'm at that time 29 or 30 years old, 31, I guess, 30 or 31. And you don't think that would impact a growing adult, but it did. And I think about that now, too. And even now, at a Vikings game, for example, you and I share a lot of meals at the Vikings games. We sit at the same table almost every Sunday, Chris Long and others, and Doogie on occasion, and different people. And you look around and see who might be sitting by themselves or wanting to keep company. And it's a pretty cool story there with Joe Mauer, and it impacts people of all ages, just in the sense that it's nice to have somebody to be with and talk to and not sit by yourself.
Can I tell you a name drop story?
Yeah, of course.
I had an experience like this, but it was a little bit different. This is total name dropping. As a matter of fact, just the other day, Oprah told me, Joe, you got to knock that off. So back when the Wolves made their run in 2002, 2003, they were playing the Lakers in the playoffs. And I'm in LA covering it for Channel 5. And I'm sitting at a table in the media lunchroom by myself. Kevin McHale comes in. There aren't a lot of seats. McHale sits next to me. He's the GM of the Wolves at the time.
Yeah.
Well, the next thing I knew, George Gervin, Magic Johnson, James Worthy all joined the table. And it's me. And I just sat back and listened to these guys tell old war stories and wondering, why am I here? And I wish I was recording this.
Right. Holy cow. Yeah.
It was like one of those out-of-body experiences.
Yeah, sometimes you fall into I had a similar situation at spring training one year. I was with Tony La Russa in his office, and we're watching a March Madness game because that's, spring training happens around then. And it was actually a Rick Pitino coached Louisville team taking on a Tom Crean coached Marquette team in the Big East. And Crean and La Russa were tight. And so I'm watching the game, and I kind of half recognize the guy that's in the office, but I'm not sure. I can't. I'm like, God, he looks familiar, and he knows his basketball. He's breaking it down. Good-looking older guy. And then, Mike Shannon, who was the voice, he did Cardinals radio, me, and a couple of others. And so Crean wins the game, and La Russa immediately picks up his phone and leaves a message while we're sitting there. Hey, great job. And La Russa's living and dying. If you're a buddy of Tony La Russa's, you're with him to the end. And in the message, he says, yeah, I'm sitting here with John Havlicek watching the game. And I'm like, that's who that is. Okay. And I'm like, how's this, and it's fun when you hang out at games and behind the scenes and have some access. It's amazing sometimes what good fortune might be. But I'm like, yeah, I just watched that game with John Havlicek, so it can be pretty cool. You mentioned the speaking business, and if people out there have, they're part of wanting Joe Schmit to come talk to their company, their club, their school, what have you, how can people do that?
And my website is joeschmit.com. And that's one T, no D, and information, and you can get a hold of me there. My email's on there, and be happy to talk to you. It's been pretty rewarding.
Yeah. Let me do a quick commercial, and then I want to ask you about some of your favorite memories. We still have some things that I want to ask you about. But first, let's talk about Affinity Plus at your local credit union. They proudly serve Minnesota since 1930, and they're a proud sponsor of the Go Gopher podcast. If you're a current Gopher student or a proud Gopher alum, that makes you eligible to join this financial that wants to build a meaningful banking relationship and put you first. You can meet with a local employee at any of their branches statewide, including one on University right near campus in Minneapolis. If you just keep going a little further east, you can probably see the KSTP tower as well. To learn more or find other ways to connect, go to affinityplus.org. That's affinityplus.org. And if you add the /Go Gophers, there's some specific stuff about Gophers. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, federally insured by NCUA, people-centered banking, perfect for Gophers. Well, Joe, it is the Go Gopher podcast, so I'd be remiss not to ask you, over your 4+ decades of covering sports in Minnesota, a few specific questions about the maroon and gold. And I think I'll just start generically. I'll just put the ball on the tee and let you go with it. But over the course of your time, did you have some favorite coaches or athletes that don the maroon and gold that stand out to you as they were fun to cover, fun to talk to, fun to interview, fun to watch play, all of that stuff?
Well, there were a lot of them because there were some great characters, some great athletes. I see you have bolder options behind you. I remember when Darrell Thompson was recruited from Rochester, and I remember seeing him as a freshman, and it was like during the workouts, and they're just kind of wearing, just shorts and T-shirts. And I was like, this guy's not a high school senior becoming a freshman. He's a pro football player body. Yeah. And then, of course, remembering his 99-yard run and seeing Darrell go to the Packers and then become a broadcaster and a great community member. So that was really fun. One of my fondest memories covering the Gophers, quite frankly, was the couple of runs the Gopher basketball team made, including the Final Four run, which they took off the record books. But, Clem was really an interesting character, and he was fun to cover. And Mike, what I remember, and you know this, as you go on in the NCAA tournament, more and more national media comes. So by the time you get to the Final Four, a news conference is every national media outlet in the country, from the LA Times to the New York Times to all the networks, to ESPN. And anyway, Clem always took care of the local guys. Like when we were done, he'd come up and say, "You guys need anything else? Need a little interview?" Whatever we wanted. And I never forgot that, because I always thought Clem, I thought, geez, if you get in that national spotlight, you'd really want it. And quite frankly, I really think that there's time now that we should, salute Clem and bring him back. It was a different era back then. I think if you really look at what happened, it wasn't as bad as was made out to be, and the punishment was very, very severe, because he was a good coach. And you talk to any of his old players, and they will run through a glass wall for him, and without thinking twice. Oh God, yeah. I was even thinking, like, when you mentioned, before there was PJ Fleck, there was Jim Wacker.
Yeah.
God, I'll never forget his opening news conference. Jeezo, Bezo, my heart's a pumping, my corpuscles are pumping. But he was just, I like people with passion, and he just had so much passion. I mean, I remember Brock Lesnar just kicking literal butt on the wrestling ring, and just how dominant he was. Lindsey Whalen.
Yeah.
Can I tell you my Lindsey Whalen story?
Yeah, let's hear it.
This is one of my favorite. So we had heard about, there's this girl from Hutchinson who's playing for the Gophers who's pretty good. And this was back, the Gopher women's basketball program, they might have been getting 500-600 people to a game.
Yep.
They were playing at, the pavilion at the time. So we went over to do a game, and I'm sitting in the front row, because that's where the press row was. And somebody, Lindsay took a charge, and she's like a sophomore, maybe sophomore at the time. And anyway, the young lady who charged her reached her hand down to help pick her up. And Lindsay grabbed it, and I heard her say to it, "You do that again, I'm going to screw you up." And she didn't use the word screw.
Yeah.
Boy, I said, I like this young lady. Well, that was the competitive. I saw that competitiveness that we all see, onto the WNBA and WNBA championships, onto the Final Four for her, and just what she did for women's sports and women's basketball. You talk about, I mean, she really might have been the biggest game changer when you look at what she really did and the impact she had at University of Minnesota sports in my era.
Yeah, and I think she probably, like, we've all kind of gotten into this hobby now of the Mount Rushmore of this and the Mount Rushmore of that. I think when you're talking, I'm not talking women's sports, I'm just talking Minnesota sports. You throw everybody in. I don't know if she's one of the four, but she's in the conversation. Think about, as you mentioned, she got the Gophers to the Final Four. They were at the Pavilion, and then she got them to play. They had to move the games to Williams Arena, where they sold out. Then became, a four-time champion, the winningest player in the history of the league at the time of her retirement in the WNBA. Obviously, your time as coach of the Gophers was a little, it went sideways there a little. She's now back with the Lynx as an assistant coach, and I'm sure she's enjoying being back around the game, it looks like, as they start training camp this week. But Olympic gold medals, national team, Hall of Fame. I mean, she's in the conversation, I would think.
Oh, I would put her on there. I'm pretty sure I would put her on there. I haven't really thought about it that far. But the other thing you have to think about, Mike, is we didn't have social media back then.
Right.
And just imagine what Lindsay Whalen did with social media. I'm not saying she would have been Caitlin Clark, because she wasn't shooting threes, and she was more of an unselfish point guard that would have unbelievable passes. But she would have been even more popular nationally.
And think about locally, too, the way that the state picked up on her. If there was a name, image, and likeness, then at least even in the short term of a year, she would have been making lots and lots of money. There's no doubt. She would have been on every other TV commercial possible out there.
Yeah, I remember I got her to sign a basketball for my charity golf tournament, and I remember it like all sold a Kirby Puckett baseball, and I thought, wow.
No doubt, no
There were
doubt.
a couple mom dads out there bidding on it.
Oh man, you mentioned Clem. He obviously I was not here then. I got here in 2006, so I was my first year here in Minnesota was Dan Munson's last year. But I was around. I mean, I grew up in Iowa and watched games there, and was obviously very familiar with those teams, Bobby Jackson and that Final Four team of '97. But part of me wishes I could have been around that team and covered it, because everybody that covered it talks about it in such revered terms, and it's almost a bit of a dichotomy in terms of Kevin Lynch was my radio partner for a couple of years, and he talked about Clem and the impact he had, and always teaching him about the right stuff, do the right thing. And the conundrum we're in is it's weird that a guy who really did instill a good work ethic and a good nature in his players, at the end of the day didn't have the control maybe necessary of the overall program not to have what happened happen. Lynch says it was not around when he was playing, but it came on a little later. Those teams with Richard Coffey and the group that went to the Sweet 16 and then the Elite Eight, those wins still count. They weren't impacted. It was a little later that some of that stuff happened. But what do you remember most about that '97 crew? You mentioned that Clem was it would give you guys some time as you further made that trip down. But that team even now is so revered. In some way, it still kind of hovers around that program for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned Bobby Jackson. I mean, what a player, and he was so good and so quick, and what a great defensive player.
Yeah.
I saw momentum on that team, because when the season started, I didn't think this was a 31 win basketball team, and I didn't see them, cutting down the nets, winning the Big Ten title. And one of my great memories was it was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. They beat Michigan to win the Big Ten title, and they celebrated on the court. Well, by the time they got to cutting down the nets, there was nobody in the arena. And for whatever reason, we were the only station from the Twin Cities that went to cover this clinching game. And we're just sitting there right there as these guys are all cutting down the nets. Their families are there. It was almost as if we were like invading a family personal time, because there were tears and there were hugs and there were whole things. And I was like going, who would have thought that that's the last time we see, the Gophers, cutting down a net.
Yeah.
It was funny. I ran into Nico Medved and Dave Thorson at the Wolves game.
Yeah.
And I said to Dave Thorson, I said, Dave, when I leave broadcasting, I always said, if I buy one season ticket, it's going to be the Gopher basketball team, because that arena, that Williams Arena, I don't know if the new generation of fans know what it's like in there. You know what it's like in there when it can get rocking. And I said, it's the best venue in town for that. And I said, give me a reason to buy tickets.
Yeah, no doubt.
So basically, I'm telling you, win. Give me a reason to buy tickets.
Yeah,
because
go string some wins.
And that is the other thing I remember. The other thing I remember, that barn. Oh, that was electric.
There has been more debate recently about whether it's time to move on from that building. I have my own thoughts on it, but I didn't grow up with it, right? So what do you think, as a guy who saw it at its heyday, where it took on a life of its own, so to speak? And you also mentioned just now that, maybe, times have changed a little in terms of what's important to certain people of certain buildings and tradition and charm and all that stuff. So do you have any strong thoughts on Williams Arena that way?
I wish there were a way to renovate Williams Arena so it was up to date. But I think in today's day and age in basketball, they probably need a new arena.
Yeah,
that is the reality, because recruiting people are going to look at you know what it's like. You got to go down underneath the bowels of the building, and their locker room is nothing like the other. Even though it's nice, it's just not up to the caliber that you see across the nation. And not that that's the only thing that people look at, but I also think the fan experience. It's like the bathrooms are kind of nasty.
Yeah.
The hallways are they're just not wide enough, and nowadays people have choices. And there's a lot of competition out there. And the way a fan experiences the game, from parking to everything else, has to compete with the other venues in town, and I don't know if Williams Arena can do that anymore.
Yeah, and now in the last couple of years they've gone to where we used to have a media meal. We would have it up in the media room. Well, now they've gone to, you get these vouchers, and it's fine. That's not a complaint. It's just the backdrop of this story. So now we have to go stand in line, right? And it takes a while. And the thing that, and again, not a complaint. Everyone has their own deal. But what I've noticed just from that, and it's something I hadn't really paid attention to because I've never been to a Gopher basketball game, at least in the 19 years I've been here, where I'm just sitting in the stands as a fan. So you get a hot dog, or you get a cup of chili, or you get the Chick-fil-A or whatever you want. Now you're standing there and you're like, okay, now where do I eat? And I find myself waiting in line to eat because there's a couple of spot where there's condiments or a napkin holder that might have a little spot you can set something down to eat, and there's 7 people waiting for that 2 feet of space atop of a garbage can. So I agree. I think the biggest thing to me is the fan experience. We can have okay things, but now in today's day and age, the question is like, where do you get the money? But I don't want to make it totally about that. I just was asking mostly about your memories of that building, and it did take on a life of its own. I remember when the Lynx had to play there, right? There was some renovations going on at the Target Center. They won a world championship in that building, and man, it was loud. I was exchanging text with Spencer Tollickson the other day when the Wolves were home. Was that the Sunday game maybe? And it looked on TV like the Target Center was just going nuts. And we joked, like, imagine if that game were at the Barn, what that building would have been like. With because the double deck, the upper deck, it has a way, I think, of feeding noise down that most buildings now, you couldn't build a new barn with the structure that it is, where the noise just funnels straight down.
No, that is probably the magic of that place. I mean, the other thing I remember is, going back, I came in '85, and there was the Iron Five.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard the stories when the Gophers had the unfortunate incident down in Madison where a bunch of players got suspended or kicked off the team, and they basically had 5 players, and that might have been even more electric than when the Gophers had their Final Four Big Ten championship year, because there were 5 players who played and they beat ranked teams. And these were not normal starters. Maybe 2 or 3 of the guys were starters. The other guys were bench guys, and they just willed their way. And Williams Arena helped them win those games. Those were electric. But I also want to say, when you were talking about the names that you remember and stuff, too many times we talk about, PJ and Nico and Don Plitzawhite. I mean, the big ones. But, there was Roy Griak and Jay Robinson and Gary Wilson and some of these coaches who, coach champions and not only coach champions, they made young men and young women better.
John Anderson,
the coach, and the impact that they had. And sometimes, we get, especially in our business on TV where you get 3 minutes a night, we didn't get to talk about those coaches and what they accomplished. The gymnastics team, they look at John Roethlisberger and then Fred Roethlisberger. I mean, just some of these outstanding coaches that the Gophers had in the Olympic sports. And we didn't even talk about Gopher hockey, and from Lucia winning a couple national championships, I love Doug Woog, So there's an example where the old it can be done, because when they used to play in the old Mariucci Arena, which was really a dump, they moved over, and guess what? It still works.
It still works, no doubt. John Anderson would be a name to throw in there, too. You think of all the championships he won, and there was a stretch there where Gopher softball made the College World Series, and Jessica Allister started it, and they worked on into some other coaches. So, there's been some outstanding, non-revenue sports, I guess is what we call them now, that have been kind of fun. Let me read one more quick sponsor mention, then we'll have a few more questions here for Joe Schmit on episode 169. The weather's now warming up. That means it's time to put your augers away, and it's time to grab the boat and get out on the water. Let OnX Fish help you find the next best bite. The Fish app offers the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your success. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. OnX Fish also shows you hotspots, lake-by-lake regulations, private and public land ownership info, and more. Download OnX Fish on the App Store or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information about the app that is changing the game on water. It's OnX Fish from OnX Maps. I was watching that wonderful piece that Chris Long put together on you, and speaking of fish, you hosted a fishing show for a time, and I saw one clip. You and Kent Herbeck, I think, were out on the boat. You caught a 50-inch muskie. So you have spent some time on the water, Joe.
Oh, yeah. I just, I'm not much of a fisherman, but, we used to do a thing called hook, line, and sinker. And it was really fun because what we did for the week before the opener, we would travel all over the state. We'd go up to Fergus Falls, and we'd go to Lake Osakis, and we would go to Hayward, Wisconsin. And we'd go to all these little lakes, Brainerd area. We'd always stop at Madden's on the way. And that's where we had the Herbie Derby, where Kent Herbeck would come and fish the opener after he retired. His first year after he retired, we called him and said, "How would you like to come up fishing with some of your buddies, and we'll put you on TV?" And he was great about it. But that's where you really get the salt of the earth, Minnesota, fans, and that's where you get the real Gopher fans, and you get the Twins fans, and so forth. But there was nothing more fun than getting out and doing that. We were younger then, and we used to always make sure that we were close to, go to a really good lake that we could do a good story on, but we had to be close to a good golf course too, because we'd golf in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and go TV at night.
What a life. No doubt. Part of that also was covering all the pro teams, obviously, not just the Gophers. And I think it's fun to chat. In that piece, they showed a clip of you anchoring some live coverage after the Twins, I believe, beat the Tigers, right, to advance to the World Series in '87. And the dome was full. And it's like midnight? Take me through that.
Yeah.
Refresh my memory on that. And where does that rank maybe in your all-time Minnesota sports moments to cover?
Well, believe it or not, Mike, it is my number one moment. And the Twins defeated Detroit to win the AL pennant. And they're going to go to their first World Series, 1987. And the Twins did not want to go. They heard there was going to be a pep rally. They got back from Detroit late. It is after 11 o'clock at night. And we go live, and they're expecting 10,000 people at the Dome. Well, there were 60,000 people at the Dome.
Crazy.
There was no pumped-in music. They had no program. No concession stands were open. Nothing was planned at all. And all of a sudden, they opened the garage door, and the team came out. Gary Gaede's crying. Kent Herbeck's, just like emotional. All these players could not believe the adulation and the appreciation the fans were showing him. And where I look at it is, it was an electric moment, a goosebump kind of moment, but it was also just so genuine. There was, too many times in sports now, you have the fanometer. They tell you when to cheer, and you can't go to a game now and there's not 5 seconds where nobody's doing anything.
Right.
There's, either a halftime act, the dance line, music, an ad, whatever. I like events that are just natural, and that was really, it was just one that I don't know how we'll ever top.
Yeah, it's so organic, I guess, would be the right term. I mean,
That's the right word.
All of a sudden people are so in love with the idea that this team, as an underdog, was able to do what it had done. Maybe it said a little bit about the hunger that this market had for a win or two, and we're still now, I wonder if the Wolves, if they can make a run here, what it might be like if they'd ever get to a finals, and it might fill the Target Center some late night coming back from, I don't know, I guess who might it be, Oklahoma City or something, and we can all dream. But I could see a similar thing happening now with some of that, just because we're at a point in which, it's time for somebody to win something in this town, right?
Well, it's, when you look at and obviously we've had the Lynx success and so forth. When you look at the four main male sports, and I always hate doing this because people think we're dissing somebody, but this market has the biggest drought of any market in the country. And it's not even close, because 91 was the last time a Minnesota team won a championship. And quite frankly, I think 91 was the last time a Minnesota team played in a championship series. Other, like I said, the Lynx, I'm not discounting them, but think about that.
Yeah.
Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland. Some of these cities you don't look at as great sports towns, they've all had it.
Yeah, no doubt. And I forget, I forget who was the was it Washington, I think, was the longest drought with Minnesota. And now I think they had the Capitals win it a couple of years ago, and the Nationals won it as well. So they've got a couple now in the last handful of years, last decade or so. So we're due. There's no doubt about it. I wanted to ask you, too, about because I've noticed this, and I don't know if people, are interested in knowing how the sausage is made, so to speak. But, I go to almost all the Gopher news conferences, but because of my duties with the Minnesota News Network, I am covering Vikings games and going out to the Vikings, and I'll see the Twins and different things. So I cover a lot of news conferences as well. And I want to know how your philosophy has been such that you guys, KSTP, not all TV stations go to everything. You guys do. It is remarkable. There's not a news conference. There's not something happening that Channel 5 is not there, that I don't see Chris Long or you or Doogie or Alex or somebody, even if it's, I say just a photog. That's more than some. Not every, look, and every station's got their niche or whatever. What is it about Channel 5, Joe, as you lead these guys that you're going to go cover stuff?
Well, the first thing I can say is what I said on the air last night. Yeah, I'm leaving the best sports team in town, and they are. They're all dedicated. It's a lot of it is really kind of organization because you got a staff, you got schedules, you got what you can do. But I think the other part of it is there's a lot of media out there that's available. For example, the Minnesota Wild, when they're in town, they will put up the news conference online. And there are some stations that decide not to send somebody there, and they'll just take it offline. And I'm like, well, how do you know what's really going on when you go to the practice? I can't tell you. So our idea was, let's go. You can't get a story unless you're there. Let's find out what's happening. And we would divvy it up. And, there were times, I always hated the Gophers because PJ always would have his news conference so doggone early. I didn't want to work a 12, 14-hour day just to go to PJ's news conference. So we'd send somebody else. But I just think that's part of your job. You got to be there, and it's all changed a little bit because the teams now do their own media. Yeah. So in some ways you compete for clicks and what have you. We're not just in the TV business, we're in the whole content business, which means, social media, YouTube, anything online, but so are the Vikings. The Vikings have the biggest sports team in town. The Vikings Entertainment Network, I think, is like 40, 50 people. Yeah. They're producing content left and right.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy. And that's part of the deal now, too, is that teams, it does get a little harder for guys like us to go cover in the sense that the access is not what it once was because teams can craft their own narrative. You look at the Vikings, I don't know what they have. They probably have 300,000 followers on their Facebook and their Twitter or X or what have you. They can tell their own stories. They don't need us maybe like they once did. That said, there is, to me, benefit of diversity of coverage, of views, of different stories, of, Joe Schmit and Joe Mauer finding Joe's buddy from his senior year of high school. You need coverage. You need different angles. You need different opinion. And I think that's what you guys have been good at.
Well, thank you. We talk about it, we think about it, we try to, be smart about our planning and plan ahead. I've been in situations where people come in, what are we going to do today? Or how are we going to fill our show? We never looked at how we're going to fill our show. We're going to say, what quality content can we put on today? And what are we going to have to leave on the cutting room floor?
Yeah, what do we got to cut tonight, right?
But you were talking about the relationships and things different. I was on Twin Cities Live with Ben Lieber. And Ben was asking me about relationships with players, how it's changed over the years. And I said, well, first of all, when I first started covering the Vikings, it was Bud Grant's return year. That was the first year I was back. And there would be 3 TV stations and 2 beat writers in the locker room. Maybe once in a while a reporter from another city or whatever. So it was really easy to get interviews. The quarterback didn't have news conferences. You could talk to him anytime you wanted to. You would, and then when you're done with the interview, you would shoot the breeze with these guys.
Sure,
Really. So now I look at J.J. McCarthy, and the Vikings hold a news conference, and J.J. has no time to talk to anybody else because they protect him. And during the season, J.J. will talk to the media twice. He will talk to the media on Wednesdays and after the game. And elsewhere, he might talk to you near his locker. He might, but most of the time, those guys have things to do and they're busy and it's their lunchtime. But it's different. And I'm not complaining, but it's just that you've had to get unique ways to get people to get to know them a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. Last couple for you, with retirement as well, are there some other things, non-work related, non-joeschmit.com related, maybe family related, that you want to bucket list now as you hopefully have some more time in regard to you're not working until midnight?
Well, I have 3 grandchildren, and 2 of them are here right now upstairs. So I want to, definitely spend some more time with the grandchildren. You know what? My wife and I were talking. My wife we've been empty nesters for a while, so my wife's at home every night, and we're talking like this summer we're going to go to like concerts in the park, and we're going to go for a bike ride, and we're not going to have to worry about what day it is. We can go to a 3:00 in the afternoon movie if it's raining.
Yeah, right.
So
right.
kind of that stuff. And then I'm not much of a handyman, but there's some projects around the house I'd like to give it a whack at. And so I know that I will be busy, and I like being busy. And a good friend of mine who he's 78 years old, and he said, here's my advice to you. He said, be curious as to what's next.
Yeah.
And I love that. I want to be curious and just see what's next.
That's awesome. Well, let's leave it at that on that note, because that's a great note to end podcast number 169 of the Go Gopher Podcast. Joe, congrats on just an unbelievable Hall of Fame career here in Minnesota. I have really enjoyed watching your work, watched how you manage that sports staff, as you mentioned, to work as it does. Watched you on those state tournament games, which I always get a kick out of, watching you and those guys work those. It's been fun, and hopefully you'll still come out to the Vikings games, because I need someone to eat those pregame lunches with.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you, and I appreciate the Gophers don't know how lucky they are to have you calling their games, and you will be on my radio dial. You always are, but I'm looking forward to a lot of success here for the Gophers. Now that I think I've been the problem. Yeah. Now that I'm retiring, Minnesota teams can just win everything.
Here we go. Yes, we'll do that. Very good. Joe, thanks so much. We appreciate it, and best of luck.
Thank you.
He is Joe Schmit. This is episode 169. My thanks again to Joe Schmit. What a great chat with Joe, the legendary sportscaster here in Minnesota, hanging it up after 40-plus years, but it's good to hear that he'll still be around, and we'll hear from him on occasion. Episode 169 is presented by Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're buying or selling a business, visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com. We're also partnered with Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, a locally member-owned full-service financial invested in you. You can learn more at affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. That's affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. They have an award-winning mobile app, so check that out as well. OnX Fish also sponsors our show. Happy fishing. Again, I'd invite you to listen to past podcasts, and please right now subscribe to the Go Gopher Podcast. It's free to subscribe and free to listen at any time. And please share the link to the podcast with others so they can subscribe and listen as well. And if you enjoyed our podcast this week, please let us know with some positive feedback on your social media channels. We'll talk again next week.